Welcome back live. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. I'm your host, Rob Moore, the Deacon of Doubt. With me, as always, the Friar of Freethought, Brian Edward. What's going on today, Brian?
I just got back from the Gods of Egypt movie. Enjoyed it. These are the forerunners to the gods that we'll probably be talking about today.
You guys are good mythicists going to see a movie that got a 13 snot-nosed rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Looks to be terrible, but we have 2 fans already of Gods of Egypt, so we'll have to check out that.
I'm standing by.
I have to check out that fine piece of cinematic work there. It is, as always, a live podcast we do here at 2 p.m. Sundays from downtown Milwaukee. It's the Grand Avenue Mall, newly named Milwaukee Cooperative, formerly the Bucket Works space. We are here above the TJ Maxx. Come on down, check us out, and contribute live to the program. What we do every week is bring you exciting topical guests from around the secular world. We like to say that we are keeping an all-seeing eye of Horus on the secular movement, we being mythicists.
How apropos.
Largely wrapped up in the larger secular movement. And no bigger dog today than Dan Barker himself from the FFRF, the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Thanks for joining us, Dan.
Hi, good afternoon, Rob.
He is the current co-president, is that right? Co-president of Freedom from Religion Foundation and the co-host of his own radio show, Freethought Radio. Does that have a signal? You guys do broadcast too? Is that strictly a podcast these days?
No, we broadcast. We produce here in our building, just in Madison, Wisconsin. Just 2 blocks from the Capitol. Mm-hmm. We expanded our building. We have a production studio, but we don't broadcast from here. We first broadcast on 92.1 FM with the mic, 92.1 here in Madison, and they rebroadcast at midnight. And then there's 8 or 10 other stations around the country, Grand Rapids and Central Missouri and Texas and New York, and they broadcast the show either Saturday or Sunday or during the week. But it becomes a podcast on Monday. So, a lot of people would rather hear a podcast because they can listen when they want to. So there's about almost 15,000 that download the podcast each week. So it's a good listening audience.
Is there a link on the FFRF website to that podcast? Or would we find it on iTunes? I mean, where can folks find that?
Yeah, you can find it on iTunes, but on our website, ffrf.org, there's a link to Freethought Radio, one of the drop-downs, and it shows where it's broadcast. And then it's also played on some internet stations, too, like radiomonterey.com. And then some podcasts repodcast a podcast. So that's kind of cool. We're almost 10 years now. In April will be our 10 full years of broadcasting.
Nice.
Congrats.
I'm discovering all of this myself, being a little bit old school. You find the iTunes, and then, like you say, there's stations that you can listen to, and they'll put together, and certain people will pick up your podcast and have it as part of the rotation, and then it's sort of marketed in a different way that way.
Yeah, indeed, a compliment.
Yeah, we need to get ourselves on a few of those. Get ourselves on a couple of those lists out there. The playlists.
Yeah. Yes, we'll have to increase our regimen.
For iTunes. Well, maybe one day we'll have the kind of listenership that a Dan Barker does. Do you have a lot of people in Grand Rapids that listen? That cracks me up that you mentioned that one first.
Yeah, well, there's actually a freethinker in Grand Rapids who owns a radio station, and they emphasize a lot of rational, skeptical, secular kind of things there. So I don't know what the listenership is, but it's a legit station. So.
That's good that they're openly secular. That we need more of that.
Speaking of legit, we want to thank Milwaukee Magazine and journalist Kevin Mueller for including us, the Mythicist Milwaukee Show, as one of the top 6 standout local podcasts here in Milwaukee. So a little slap on our own back.
We'll take it
with my long arms, and
definitely flattered. Yeah,
thanks to Milwaukee Magazine and Mario and the whole gang down there, Kevin Mueller for writing that up and including us. So today, no exception. Dan Barker happy to join us, or we're happy to have him join us, I should say, here at the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. And we want to remind everyone to go to the website and support us if you can by buying a membership to Mythicist Milwaukee. There's a couple of different options for doing that. A monthly payment, easy, $8 a month, or $75 a year, and you get a lot of swag with that. One of those things being, correct me if I'm wrong, but you get some discount to the conference that Dan will be joining us in October to speak at, and thanks for doing that. Do you know what you're going to do yet, or you put those things together last minute, or you got a whole stock of presentations that you do from flying around so much to do it, Dan?
I let the spirit lead.
Yeah, boy, that's what I like to say. Showman, of course.
No, I have some stock shows and talks that I give and debates. Right now, I've been talking about my new book, the God book, but it's kind of up to you. If there's something you want, I'll give you my topics. But if there's something you want, let me know.
You got it. And who knows what current event will, be popular in October too. And I know you guys stay very current.
Well, I used to have the gift of prophecy, but I don't know anymore. So sorry.
I'm looking forward to the songs. I enjoy the political ditties and the satirical. Witty, little songs that you write on the piano, and do those things come out a lot, or do you go through spurts, or do you ever write any new ones? How does that work for you?
Oh, I'm always working on one or two new songs, and some of them I throw away because they're not very good. But I'm real happy about the song that I got to co-write with Charles Strauss, the Broadway composer who wrote Annie and Bye Bye Birdie. He's just a legend. He's in his 80s now, and so. He just writes music, so he asked me to send him some lyrics that are secular, because he's a lifelong atheist.
Wow.
And that was really an honor. We wrote a song together called Poor Little Me. So I'll perform that in October.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's really saying something. And I got to say, does it impress you sometimes when you stand back and look at who you know and who you're mingling with and who you're hobnobbing with? Richard Dawkins wrote the foreword to your new book, and he's a buddy of yours. Does it kind of amaze you sometimes?
Yeah, it does, because from years ago, from being a preacher, 25-year-old, a 35-year-old preacher, and then to think of this total change, and to get to know people like Dawkins and Steven Pinker and Daniel Dennett, and just all these great minds, and Andrienne, and it's kind of like the world is smaller than you think, because there's just you just get to meet all these wonderful thinkers.
Yeah, and also, in coming out, I noticed that you met your wife on the Oprah Show in 1984. That was a tidbit that I didn't know.
Well, that was fun, but that was a good reason to like the show. But I had been preaching that year. I sent out my letter of deconversion on January of 1984, and then here in September, just 8 or 9 months later. The very first time I spoke publicly about my atheism before any audience was on that TV show in Chicago, and Oprah Winfrey was the host. It was called AM Chicago, just before she went national.
Wow.
And so that's also the first time that I knowingly met any other atheists, which was Gaylor and Annie Laurie Gaylor, and another Chicago woman. And this is really fun, it was the first time I had spoken before a hostile audience. And I loved that. Oprah, her producers had packed the audience, and you can see it online. I think you can Google, Barker, Oprah, Gaylor, or something. Anyway, Oprah had packed that audience with all these Bible thumpers, and this woman was calling Annie Laurie a witch, and it was pretty exciting. And I just really got hooked on that whole, being able to say something that makes a difference, instead of just preaching to the churches all the time where everybody loves you and they say amen, to actually say something that makes people think.
Yeah.
Was really fun.
Now, at that point, how did you get to be on that show at that point, having just come out of the ministry?
Well, Anne Gaylor, who's the principal founder of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and her daughter Annie Laurie, had been on People Are Talking in Baltimore the previous year, and Oprah Winfrey was the co-host of that show in Baltimore, and so she met them then. And Oprah Winfrey then, when she was auditioning for the show in Chicago, to go into AM Chicago, she used that show with Ann and Annie Laurie, and that got her the job in Chicago. So she said, well, you guys helped me get my job in Chicago, so I'm going to have you back on my show. So then I had written a letter to Annie Laurie, because I read one of her books, and she didn't reply at all, but her mom did. Her mom saw the letter, and she said, "Why don't you write an article for our newspaper, Freethought Today?" That was the first year of publication. So then when Oprah's producers were looking for doing a show about atheism, they said, "Do you know anybody else?" And Ann said, "Well, I got this letter from this preacher, this guy who just stopped preaching in California." So that's how it happened. They called me up and flew me out there. And so that's where we met. And so our daughter, Sabrina, has a video of the day her parents met, which is pretty cool.
That is cool.
That's a story. I had no idea about that. And, of course, you just lost your mother-in-law not that long ago, so our condolences there.
She died last June of last year. Yeah.
And as you stated, she was the principal co-founder of the Freedom from Religion. What year was that?
Well, it was 1976. It was a local group. She and Annie Laurie, her daughter, founded the group. And in 1978, the group went national and became a national nonprofit. So what is that?
Almost 40 years.
Yeah, almost 40 years. Yeah, well, 40 years since they started it. Yeah, that's right. Wow.
So fast forwarding to today and your new book that came out, tell us why Dawkins wanted you to write this, but where did you go from there? I know he wrote the foreword and he has that statement that you quote that has like 25 different adjectives that kind of pick
39,
at.
Or is it 39? Go ahead and tell us.
Is it 39? I know that bloodthirsty, unforgiving, vindictive, jealous, and it goes on. Where did you go from there?
Well, so this really was kind of an accident. It wasn't supposed to be a book. Back in 2014, Richard emailed me, and he said he was preparing a slide, like a PowerPoint, a keynote slide, because he uses Macs. Macs and PCs are kind of like Catholics and Protestants, So it turns out that It turns out that Dawkins and I are in the true religion. We are Mac users. And anyway, so he was preparing a slide because in the God Delusion, people have called that book strident and contentious, right? But it's not really. If you read it, the God Delusion, which came out in 2006, it's passionate and persuasive, but it's not like strident and angry, except for one sentence. And even Dawkins admits this. The first sentence in chapter 2, where he says, "The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully." And there's actually 19 in that list. And so people have really, he said he's been criticized for that one sentence more than anything else he's ever written. In fact, the chief rabbi of England called that sentence anti-Semitic. Although he later changed his mind. He later backed off and he realized, well, just because you're criticizing the Bible doesn't mean you're anti-Semitic. Yeah. So anyway, Richard emailed me and he said he wanted to make this keynote slide that he called a spider diagram, where the beginning of the sentence would be the body of the spider, and then these 19 legs would go out. And so you could click on the leg that says ethnic cleanser, for example, yes. And then up would pop the verse that says, awesome. "You shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land, for I have given you the land to possess," plus a bunch more verses. And I thought, that's a cool idea. So we started working on it. And for a couple of months, we were going back and forth. What about this and what about that? And after a while, there got to be more than 1,500 verses to document all that. And then he said, "You know what? This would make a good book." And the pun was intended, a good book, get it? And when Annie Laurie read that email that we got, she said, "Hell yes, that would be a great book." So most of the research was already done. And so then I decided, well, instead of just making a list, because that would be boring, just a long list, that I would introduce each of the chapters, each of those 19 chapters, with one or two stories and talk about, the Old Testament. And so, and then it turns out that as I was researching, I discovered that Richard had either omitted or neglected a few more things. Well, he probably thought 19 was enough. But so anyway, part one of the book is Dawkins was right with those 19 chapters that list. But part two of the book is called Dawkins was too kind. And I have 8 more. I have angry and merciless and curse-hurling and cannibalistic and aborticidal and vaxicidal. Do you know what that is, vaxicidal?
No.
It's the killing of cows, like vaccine. The killing of animals, basically. Vaxicidal and slave monger, because slavery was a big thing that he overlooked. So it turns out there's 28 total, plus a final chapter, because you know what Christians are going to say. What about Jesus?
Right.
The Old Testament was, but what about Jesus? So the final chapter is called What About Jesus? And it goes in to show that Jesus proudly called himself, the Father and I are one, and he was the same. And so everything that applies to the Old Testament God applies equally to Jesus.
That's a good take on it. There's a good answer for those.
Right, and I remember one of your talks you mentioned that I have not come to abolish a single letter of the law, but to fulfill, which suggests that these laws aren't being abrogated because of some new treaty.
Well, of course, we know the problem is that most Christians don't really know the Bible, certainly not as well as a Dan Barker, and not, in fact, as well as most atheists, and that's been shown. And the book, we're looking at a copy. It's a good-looking book. I love the cover. It looks like the underworld with volcanoes and darkness and fire erupting. But it strikes me that the book is it's accessible. It's maybe something that somebody who's on the fence or somebody who doesn't know a lot about what the Bible actually contains might be able to digest a little more easily and kind of maybe take that extra step onto agnosticism at least. Is it meant to do that? Is it a book for the masses?
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, because you are right. Most people don't read the Bible, and I point out that anybody who claims to worship and adore the God of the Bible, they have either abandoned all sense of moral judgment because he is horrible, or they've never read it. And I prefer to think the latter, because most believers are good people. Most Christians and Jews are really good people, and they don't know what's in their own book. And so, Isaac Asimov said, properly read, the Bible is the most potent force for atheism ever conceived.
Great quote.
And, A.A. Milne, the author of Winnie the Pooh, he said he thinks the Old Testament is single-handedly responsible for more atheists than any other work in history. Because if you read it, you go, my goodness, how could anyone, pretend or even claim that this is good or that this is moral? It's supposed to be a good book. And so you see the way it's laid out. If you're interested, for example, in misogyny, you can go to chapter 9 and look at the chapter of misogyny and see how hateful the Bible is toward women. Or if you're interested in the homophobic one, what does the Bible say about homophobia and Sodom and Gomorrah and all that stuff? So you can pick the chapters you like or scan through it. The bloodthirsty chapter is really long, and
Yes.
Nietzsche said he wanted to put on gloves before he read it. There's so much blood being spilled, and not just being spilled and all that, but fingers dripping in the blood, dipping their fingers and their thumbs and their toes, and they sprinkle it on the altar. It's just blood, 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 blood. For some reason, God's wrath will not be appeased unless something dies and blood is being shed. And of course, that was the precursor to Jesus having to shed his blood on the cross. So it's really a gruesome, ghastly system of salvation.
Yeah.
Listener Kristen points out God's unnatural hate for shellfish. Do you know what's behind God's dislike of shellfish?
And shrimp.
What's up with that one?
Yeah, well, those ancient Israelites had these dietary laws that may or may not have had some basis in history, but they decided what you should wear, what you should eat, how women should dress. There's whole chapters about how you should prepare these garments for the priests. The next time you're in a hotel room and you need some desperately needed guidance on how to make blue tassels on the bells on the bottom of your priest garments, well, then there's that book in the drawer. You can look at it, and what foods you should eat. Yeah, and pork and you cannot eat any four-legged insects, and you can't eat any birds, including bats.
By definition, have 6 legs.
Yeah, what's a four-legged insect?
Yeah, I know. Or a four-legged flying thing is what it says.
Oh, four-legged flying thing.
You can't eat any, which is what?
Yeah.
What's a four-legged?
Maybe a flying
Pegasus?
squirrel?
Pegasus. You have to leave those alone.
Pegasus. A unicorn.
I guess a flying horse would be a four-legged flying thing, but anyway, it's just so much mind-numbing detail. No wonder people don't read it. It's just so.
Well, that's it. I was going to mention it's got like getting through those chapters of Moby Dick where they just talk about the accounting of whaling or the what's on board the ship. For God's sake, it's just lists of shit. No one wants to wade through that.
Begat.
But yes. Recall the begats, as someone pointed out. At least you have funny names to look at with the begats, but some of those laws and some of those lists and some of those, like, how do you get through that?
In its defense, it does help you with the Sunday crossword puzzle.
Indeed.
I mean, knowing the sons of Noah will help you get 37 across.
I think so. Crossword puzzle creators are sometimes desperate to find a word, and they go through these Old Testament. The shortest man in the Bible is Bildad the Shuhite. That's just a joke. Shuhite.
Okay, I do the crossword puzzles. I was going to write that down. Okay, you got me.
It's the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. We're talking to Dan Barker. I want to remind everyone to go to Patreon and sign up for a pledge. You can pledge as little or as much as you want per show or per time period and get it done. Help us bring to you the quality entertainment that we bring. Go ahead, Brian.
No, I was going to say, and Dan, obviously your arguments over the whether these people are evil, petty, unjust, make a lot of sense. But what about the historicity itself? Where do you stand on whether these people existed, whether they're good or bad, both in the Old and the New Testament? Where do you stand?
Yeah, well, and that's a good question because your show is called Mythicists. I know how to spell that. I wonder if some of your listeners don't know how to spell mythicist.
I think I can do it. Mythicist.
Yeah, so a myth. It's a myth. In other words, mythicists are people who think that all of it or the majority is mythical. Well, certainly, and right on the cover of the book, the God of the Old Testament is the most unpleasant character in all fiction, right? So right on the cover, we're saying it's fictional, right? And so just because we're criticizing God doesn't mean we think he really, really existed. Be like saying if you think the big bad wolf was a bad character, you're admitting that he existed, right? You can make literary judgments about these characters.
Good point.
And obviously a whole bunch of the stories just did not happen and could not have happened. They had a war and they killed 160,000 people in one day. I'm sure. Or in the city of Beth Shemesh, 50,000 people were killed. There's no way any city in that area in that time of history had that many people. So they were obvious exaggerations.
Yeah, that's trumping Gettysburg. I mean, just to get the scale.
Yeah, and then there's anachronisms too. They talk. The patriarchs all had their camel herds, and the camels in Egypt. But we now know from archaeology that there were no domesticated camels until around the 10th century
BC. I did not know that. 10th century AD or BC?
BC.
Okay.
So the patriarchs were supposedly, 4,000-5,000 years earlier than that.
Right, yeah, 2400 BC or so. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it depends. 400 and something, yeah. But the writers of the Old Testament, which were like in the 6th century BC, they didn't realize that domesticated camels were only 300 or 400 years before that, and they projected it way, way back. There were camels. There were wild camels, and you can find some camel bones, but using them for caravans and for herds did not happen way back during the time, supposedly, when these stories were told. So on the one hand, we do see an awful lot of embellishment and non-historical and mistakes. On the other hand, some of those cities did exist, and some of those people, the Canaanites, did exist. Mm-hmm. It's funny that in the story of the Exodus and the plagues of Egypt, it's funny that they don't name the Pharaoh.
No.
Have you ever realized that? They don't give a name to that, although they gave names to a whole bunch of these other Canaanite kings and rulers.
Well, and they gave names to Noah's midwife, or not Noah, Moses' midwives. They're named, but the Pharaoh isn't.
The Pharaoh himself is not named. So, I mean, that story never happened. We know from history, from archaeology, that whole story of the Exodus is a myth. And no wonder they didn't name the Pharaoh. They were writing just about some ancient story that nobody was ever going to check on, right? Mm-hmm. So they could just make up the story. But if those people, and there would have been 2 or 3 million people that were leaving Israel on a day's notice and wandering for 40 years in that Sinai Peninsula, which is only a little more than 100 miles across, there should have been plenty of archaeological evidence. Besides that, they didn't even have to go across the Red Sea. The Red Sea is way south. The authors made them leave Egypt and go all the way south so they could cross the Red Sea, then come back up again, which is dumb. They could have just walked straight across to the peninsula. So there's a whole bunch of, the story itself is a myth. That doesn't mean that there aren't some, it's like writing historical fiction. It doesn't mean there weren't some actual historical facts here and there, but the story itself never happened.
Well, I'm going to run home and take the Campbells right out of my nativity scene, man. I'm embarrassed.
No, it's a good point, right? Historical fiction will sometimes embellish, merge a number of characters into one for simplicity. But yes, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Moses wouldn't be a good navigator, certainly.
We lost Acharya S. last year, D.M. Murdoch. Did you read the Moses book?
Oh, yeah, that's a wonderful book. Yeah, D.M. Murdoch. Yeah, in fact, I use that for a debate, and she brings up a lot of those points too. About all these stories, and so it's fictional. Although you might find here and there something that like if you're reading one of James Michener's novels about any of his novels, Chesapeake or The Source, you will agree that yes, there was a New York City. Yes, there was a Hilo, Hawaii. Yeah. Yes, there was a Mussolini. But that doesn't mean the stories themselves were true. It's historical fiction. So the fiction is written within a supposed historical context, and the myth of it is betrayed when the authors get some of the facts wrong. They're trying to root it in history, and to some extent they are successful, even though the stories are mythical, and to other extents they're not.
That's a great point. As far as going across the Red Sea, I mean, why not just beam them over to the other side? I don't know why you want to part the waters. I mean, there's plenty of ways to do it. Right?
Yeah, well, some historians suggest that the story was made up because they were afraid of the Nephilim, the giants. But here's this all-powerful God who can do these 10 horrible plagues, and yet they have to wait for 40 years to get away from these giants, which, by the way, if a race of giants existed, we would know that. We would have evidence of that, but there is no evidence. And by the way, thinking about the plagues, if God knew that the 10th plague would do the trick, then what was the point of the first 9?
That's true.
He was like a cat with a mouse. In fact, you can't blame Pharaoh for the last 4. After the 6th one, Pharaoh said, okay, let him go. And God said, nope, I'm not done yet. I got some more tricks to show you. So he hardened his heart and he did another plague. And then Pharaoh said, okay, I give, let him go. And God said, nope, you can't go yet. No, you can't. For some reason, God must have 10 fingers, right? The 10 commandments and the 10 plagues. Right. He must have wanted this round number to show off. And that's part of my chapter about bully. He's a bully. Bullies like to draw out their torture. They like to use these big words and show how small you are. And he basically said, I have yet to show my power so that the world will know that I am great. So I can't stop more plagues. So that was gratuitous. That was capriciously malevolent. He could have found a better way to,
Indeed,
to free God's chosen people.
It sounds like a little bit like UFC versus boxing. To keep going after the 6th plague seems like you're allowed to hit these guys when they're down. It just reminds me of a little bit more. Let's finish him off.
We were talking to Dan Barker. He is the Queen Elizabeth of FFRF, and by that I mean he gets to wear the jewels and be on TV, but somebody else does all the heavy lifting around there. Isn't that true, Dan? Or do you actually have real responsibilities besides being the ambassador and a statesman for atheism? I'm teasing you.
Oh, I get it. Yeah. So we have about 20 staff now, and we're growing. We're hiring some more, and we have 5 full-time attorneys. Plus, right now we have two more full-time attorneys working on fellowship. So we have 7 attorneys in the building, plus a full-time legal assistant and some legal interns. And they are really busy fielding complaints of state-church separation, writing letters mostly, but we're also involved in some litigation. We have about a dozen lawsuits. We just sued the governor of Texas last week, and we just won a lawsuit in California over a school board that was praying, and the judge his name was Jesus. What was his last name? Anyway, the reporter said, "Here's the Jesus I can believe in." He wrote a really good decision, stopping the school board from having. It's like Sunday school revival meetings during the school board meetings. So that was great. So yeah, most of the heavy lifting is done by our attorneys. Annie Laurie and I are co-directors and co-presidents, and so we do a lot of the PR. But our attorneys do too. They're always on the local news in some town where we made a complaint, and they really what they really want to do as attorneys is they want to sue, and we're having to kind of rein them in. We're having to say try to solve these cases without going to court, and which happens a lot. We have hundreds and hundreds of victories without even going to court. We just write a letter and we tell the mayor or the principal or the post office, whatever we're complaining about, you can't do this, and sometimes they just stop, which is really nice. But we're growing.
That's good. Do you guys do any international work at all? We've hosted like kind of the leader of the Kenyan atheists, Harrison Mumia, on our podcast, and he's saying that the government will not approve their entity, the Kenyan government, as an organization because it would be
disruptive,
harmful to the peace in the country. I mean, have you ever thought about like helping those internationally? I mean, the Kenyan atheist group is a small one, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I saw that. I think I saw a TV show that they were on a few months ago, and they were really sharp people, the Kenyan atheists. And the Freedom from Religion Foundation is a member of the Atheist Alliance International. So here in the U.S., we focus on the First Amendment to our Constitution in the United States, but we do care about international issues. And so as much as we can, we will reach out and try to help. And there's a new group that is spun off from FFRF called Non-Belief Relief, which is raising money to help victims of oppression and also to help with disasters too. So, and so with some of these Bangladeshi atheist bloggers who are being threatened, some of them were killed.
Yes,
and they need to get out of the country, and they need some quick exit money to get out of the country. So sometimes we're able to jump in and help in cases like that.
Well, that was good. I know Sean handed over to Kenya to help with the missions and orphans there. That many of the groups were religious, although he's secular. And what was awesome was getting these emails back. I found the one Kenyan atheist and already met with him, and it was great.
To learn the extent to which religious indoctrination is enforced by the government, not just excused or tolerated or overlooked. It's actually in play as a system over there, where it's expected in the schools, and you're
right.
This is what you get up in the morning and you learn this Bible verse, and you read this chapter, and you say this prayer, and it's a part of the way they're brought up. So Christianity, in its missionary branch, has made inroads to the point where the government is completely afflicted in Kenya with complete involvement of church and state.
Yeah, they put a value judgment on it, just like it's smart to be able to learn how to read. They mix in religion with literacy.
Well, that's good to hear that FFRF pays attention. At least I wouldn't have known that. I would have figured they're so wrapped up with domestic stuff that there wouldn't be time for that. But that's great, and also a disaster relief branch. It sounds like mention that again. What's the actual name of the acronym?
Well, it's called Non-Belief Relief.
I love it.
And we help with disasters, and we just started last fall, so it's pretty new. And we've sent some money for some disaster relief here and there, and we sent money to Doctors Without Borders when their hospital was bombed over in Afghanistan, and and then we've helped individuals too. But one of the main reasons we started Non-Belief Relief is because we want to challenge the fact that churches and religious organizations that are charities don't have to file a 990 form with the government, but everything else does. So Freedom from Religion Foundation, we have to file this extensive 990 form. We have to pay an accountant to do it for us, which shows the government and shows you can go online and see our 990, every penny we take in and every penny that's spent, what it's spent on. You can go online right now and see my salary. We are transparent. We are accountable. We have to be as a nonprofit. But churches don't. So a couple of years ago, we decided to sue over that and say, this isn't fair that we have to file this 990 and churches don't. Nobody knows what their money's spent on or what. But the judge kicked us out saying, well, you haven't shown any injury. You could show injury by refusing to file the 990, and then you could come back into court. But we don't want to jeopardize FFRF's tax exemption, right? We don't want to break the IRS rules to show that we've been injured by the IRS. So we started a new nonprofit called Non-Belief Relief, which legitimately wants to help people. We've always wanted to do this, but we're not going to file the 990. We are going to violate the rules on purpose, hoping that the IRS will penalize us or shut us down or something, in which case then we will have legal injury to go back into court and say, there, look, churches don't file and they get to run, but we're not filing and we don't. So it's kind of like killing two birds with one stone. This is a way to help in the world, but it's also a way for us to get legal standing to proceed to challenge this, what we think is an unconstitutional favoritism to religion.
That's really good. And, of course, humanist disaster relief is kind of a new phenomenon. We ourselves interviewed Rebecca Vitzman, the famous hurricane atheist, and Noel George from Foundation Beyond Belief, right? And they recently started their own, humanist disaster recovery team, and one of the first, if not the first ever. So that seems like a trend, and people, can be seen to not be amoral. Being atheists, indeed, can have foundations that offer assistance without the church's backing. And help raise the public profile of the evil atheist in our realm. But here's Dan Barker, telling us that there's a way to expose an unjust law as a part of it too.
That's great. What do you feel like in FFRF? What are you most proud of? What do you feel like your biggest contributions have been, or specifically FFRFs? What are you most proud of?
We have two purposes. Mm-hmm. The two purposes are to keep religion and government separate, and to educate the public about the views of non-theists. So we're an educational organization, and we like to think both purposes are equal, but we are known now for the first purpose primarily. We are known because we take action, we go to court, we make a difference, we sue the government, we sue the president, we sued Obama. Twice we've sued Obama. We sued President G.W. Bush, and we've sued Reagan, and so I think we're on the map, especially among these religious right legal groups that hate us. Mm-hmm. Actually, they hate us, but they love us. You know why? Because they can raise money on us. They send out all these fundraisers. The Freedom from Religion Foundation is trying to take the Jesus picture down from a middle school wall. Send money and we'll fight them, right? So
that's got to sting a little.
Well, I think they should be sending us an award because we're helping them raise money. But anyway, it works both ways. Because people do, they're mad about our attempts to separate state and church, so they send lots of money to these groups, which are our enemies in court, basically. So we here in Wisconsin, you might remember this back in the 90s, we sued over the Good Friday law. It used to be a law in Wisconsin that all government offices were closed on Good Friday for worship, and it even said it in the law, for worship on Good Friday before Easter. And we knew people who were going to the University of Wisconsin Memorial Library, they grabbed the handle of the door and it was locked. They said, "What? I got a term paper, I got to work." And it was shut on Friday before Easter. And in the city library and all the government offices. So we sued over that, and Governor Tommy Thompson at the time fought it, and James Doyle, who was the Attorney General at the time, advised Thompson, don't fight this because you're going to lose it. And he ignored his advice and hired outside counsel. In fact, he did that 3 times, and we won all 3 times. So that was a great victory. So now on Good Friday, in fact, the next Good Friday, we went to the city library, and it was full. Wow. People wanted to use it.
Why not?
So it was really neat. And in government offices, so they changed the law. It took a while because, there's these teacher contracts, with the unions and that. They changed the law so that any government worker in Wisconsin can take a half-day floating holiday, which they could use on Good Friday, or if you're Jewish or whatever else you are, you could use it some other time, because Jews had to make special arrangements for their holy days, right? But Christians had it built in. So if you want to take a half day and go worship down at Frank's bar, you can do that now, with that half day off.
Are they having mass down at Frank's?
Over your Guinness.
I don't know Frank personally.
But you do know Richard Dawkins. How is he? Have you talked to him?
Oh, I didn't hear your question. I'm sorry.
I said, how is Richard Dawkins? You do know Richard. You don't know Frank, but you know Professor Dawkins. We're wondering how he is.
Oh, how he is. Yeah, he's improving, and he had to cancel a bunch of speaking engagements. And so the big question is, will he be able to make it to the Reason rally on June the 4th in Washington, D.C.? And he and his doctors cannot comment on that. They can't promise. He had a big trip to New Zealand and Australia that he had to cancel. So everybody's going to back off. But his stroke, that he had a couple of weeks ago, his stroke was not cognitive. It didn't affect any cognitive functions, but it affected apparently the left side of his body as far as movement goes. So he's in therapy. And however, right after the stroke, that next week when he came home, the first thing he tweeted was about this new book, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction. So he wants to stay involved, and he's staying busy, but we're going to have to wait and see.
Speaking about attendance at the Reason rally, you recently written a pretty gracious letter to Obama asking him to reach out to the secular community to kind of make history in that way. What do you want him to do? I mean, what is your real aim here?
Well, just to show up and welcome the Reason rally to D.C. That would be enough. Just if he was there to say, we welcome you people, you non-believers. Because, he was in the news he visited a mosque, and he said, Muslims are Americans too. He's visited synagogues, and he's gone to churches. And if he's going to do that, he should not ignore those of us who are non-religious. And so we invited him to come to anything, like one of our conventions, or even just come to our building, But we pointed out that the Reason rally would be perfect right there in D.C. on June the 4th.
Would a video address suffice? I mean, what would you settle for?
Oh, anything where he would just say, yes, I'll show up for whatever. And that way we could say, look, he really is serious about recognizing the real diversity in our country. And,
well, don't you think as a lame duck, he's got nothing to lose, isn't it?
That's
time.
True.
It's now there's a time to do things like this, isn't it? If you're a president.
Yeah, but you have to care to do it.
Do. And if there is a prayer breakfast, it does make sense to just. I mean, you wouldn't have to condone it. You would just say, we understand that some Americans are non-religious.
Yep.
And
you guys are great too.
Yeah, he said remarks like that. In the past, he has said things about non-believers. So, he's acknowledged that we are a diverse country. Well, his mother was a secular woman. She was I don't know if she was an atheist, but she was a secular humanist type person, a non-religious person.
Yeah. And Bernie Sanders, speaking of, secular, only mentioned what he thought freedom of religion was. He actually mentions it doesn't say non-belief, but your choice to practice, which at least tacitly understands that some people don't choose to do this.
Yeah, well, and he's very strong on state church separation, so
as well he should be.
Would he get your endorsement?
Oh, I didn't hear that.
Would he get your endorsement?
Yeah, who do you like?
I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, Annie Laurie and I are co-directors of a nonprofit, and we can't be political.
That's right. I can't say it's true.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds lawyerly, but it's true. You can't come. You can't come out.
Okay, fair.
So even among our staff, the staff here at Freedom from Religion Foundation, they're all really open about their political views, and they're not all the same, which is great. But Annie Laurie and I just bite our tongues, and we have to not,
Yeah, you could get in real trouble if it slips too. I bet.
You're a good man.
Yeah. And on our radio show, for example, when we talk about candidates, we have to be careful to frame it as we're criticizing their remarks about religion, and not an endorsement or don't vote for this person. But it's a kind of a fine line there, because you want to criticize them, but In our organization, believe it or not, we have some conservatives in our group. We have Republicans in the group. There's at least, as far as I know, there's at least one Tea Party member who's a member of our organization. Although the huge majority of our organization identify as liberal progressive. And in our survey that we just tabulated of more than 8,000 of our members out of 23,000, the majority declined to tell us their political affiliation, which is kind of interesting. It's kind of neat. We don't need to know that and actually don't want to know that. But those that did tell us, about 70% identified as strongly liberal progressive. And there's libertarians, we have socialists, there's a couple of communists, there's a, there's a bunch of Green Party people and independents. So
I like that, though. That's a hard number. 70% liberal.
Yeah, which means 30% not.
It makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, and it doesn't follow that if you're an atheist, you're necessarily a liberal.
No, I agree.
We have members of our group who are pro-guns and pro-death penalty and anti-abortion, and it makes for really interesting table talk at our conventions. It's
it does. Yeah. The herd of cats.
Although I think it's pretty clear that on our staff here, almost all of them would be progressive type people. Although we can't endorse any particular candidate.
It's the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. It's time for a feature we like to call Myth of the Day. Here's Antonio with today's Myth of the Day. Take it away, Antonio.
And thank you again, Dan, for being on the show today. I'd like to thank on Twitter Miguel Connor, who will be at the conference where you will be speaking as well. He will be our moderator. And thank you as well to Godless Engineer and also Craft, Kenosha Area Freethinkers, for retweeting your presence today. The Myth of the Day today, I will quote out of your book today, Mr. Barker, God, the most unpleasant character in all fiction, with a foreword from Richard Dawkins. This book that I hold in my hand as well will be raffled off by the Kenosha Area Free Thinkers. So why were they, the Jews, so angry? It wasn't simply because Jesus was claiming to be a son or prophet of their God. The Jews attacked him because they knew exactly who he was referring to when he said, quote unquote, I am. Jesus was directly equating himself with Yahweh, quoting the Old Testament. When Jesus told the Jews before Abraham was, I am, he knew that they would understand he was calling himself what their God was calling himself, I am. It follows that every single attribute Richard Dawkins used to describe the fictional God of the Old Testament applies equally to Jesus because he was claiming he was the God of the Old Testament. We can therefore say Jesus of the New Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, felicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully, a pyromaniacal, angry, merciless, curse-hurling, vasticidal, aborticidal, cannibalistic slavemonger. If you think that sentence was unwarranted, then you believe Jesus was somebody other than who he claimed to be. You may be right. There may have been a quote-unquote Jesus of history, a simple man who was humbler than the quote-unquote Jesus of the New Testament character. If you hold that view, then you agree that the New Testament Jesus was fictional, a legendary caricature exaggerated from one of the many self-proclaimed messiahs in that time of history. In any event, the Jesus of the New Testament thought and taught that he was the God of the Old Testament. Yep. That is our myth of the day.
There you have it, the myth of the loving God.
And I think the word of the day is vasicide.
Vasicide, yes, from the Latin root, como vaca.
In a sentence, a vegan will probably not condone vasicide.
No, I don't think they condone any side.
Well, and a planticide. I mean, I'm sure plants are alive.
Myth of the Day, brought to you by Kenosha Racine Atheists and Free Thinkers. Having our fundraising party on March 12th. As Antonio stated, we'll be raffling off the donated copy of God, the most unpleasant character in all fiction. And we have the author of that fine tome on the line. It's Dan Barker himself, the big dog. You see what I do there? Because he like Barker, like Barks like a dog. He's the big dog of atheism.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Are you going to be
Supposed
at
to be
the? Are you going to be at the Reason Rally, Dan?
Yeah, we'll be at it. The Freedom from Religion Foundation is one of the major sponsors, so we're on the board, and the board meetings is pretty amazing. People sometimes complain about how atheists and secular groups don't cooperate. Well, here are all the major secular, freethought, humanist, atheist groups in the country. We're all sitting at the same board and discussing this Reason Rally, and it's really exciting. The program committees and all the planning that goes into this thing. So we'll be at it, and we'll have a table at the booth, and Annie Laurie and I will be saying something. If there's a grand piano, and we don't know yet, if there is one, then I'll play the grand piano. I might play "Beware of Dogma," or maybe that song I told you about, "Poor Little Me."
The classics. Yeah. Beware of Dogma. The classics.
One of 200, according to Wikipedia. 200 published songs.
Nice. We've been lucky enough to help out volunteering, so I know what you're talking about. It's been a absolute thrill to see the process and everybody working together, and I think that's really the hallmark of the new what people call a movement. And I've had people say to me, "There's no movement. I'm just an atheist, and there's no movement." But we didn't really see the kind of cooperation in the past that we're seeing now. And I think that herd of cats is finally coming together. Would you agree with that? I mean, are people making a real effort, Dan, to work together to kind of forward a secular agenda in a way that didn't happen 20 years ago?
Yeah, we are. But on the one hand, all of our secular groups, national and regional, we are friendly competitors, if you know what I mean. We're all working, kind of for the same members in that. And in fact, a lot of people join all the groups. I know people who are members of all of them. It's not like a church where you can only be a Methodist or you can only be a Baptist. But, the Reason Rally in 2012 was a big success, which was the same thing. It was all the groups working together. So what happens is either on something like the Reason Rally or on a legal case, for example, the groups will come together voluntarily on an ad hoc basis. So there's no formal coalition, except maybe the Secular Coalition for America, which is for lobbying. There's no real formal coalition, and the American Humanists and American Atheists and CFI and Freedom from Religion and all these other groups will sometimes realize something's important, like a case before the Supreme Court. So all of our attorneys will get on the phone, and what can we do? How can we help? How can we share the burden of writing these amicus briefs? And that's really exciting. We realize there's a legal difference, a legal separation between our groups, but on an ad hoc basis to come together and do something like the Reason Rally does show that we all really care about the bigger picture.
Yeah, that is almost like the UN. I'm feeling, just being able to come out with a statement that everyone agrees on, or a position.
So what are the big violators right now in terms of what FFRF is out there fighting violations here? What's you're off to Washington next? Did you say who is it? Texas? Are they the root of all evil? Where are the biggest? Where's the big nastiness going on?
Too far.
I don't know.
Well, there's a lot that comes out of Texas that this case that's being heard this week by the Supreme Court. The whole woman's health care issue with abortion and all that. But we're suing the governor of Texas because he took down our display from the Austin State Capitol building, a display which was approved by the board and which had a legislative sponsor from Texas. He didn't like our display because he thought it was mocking religion, so he took it down. And he can't do that. He can't censor somebody's speech. I mean, the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. So he abridged our freedom of speech. So we're suing on free speech grounds as well as Establishment Clause grounds and equal protection. And we got a judge. Apparently the judge has been pretty fair. We're going to have to see what happens. But the government, the governor and his cohorts there are all saying our case is meritless because we have a responsibility to uphold morality and decency within the Capitol. So we cannot allow these juvenile displays that mock religion.
It's not juvenile. That's the thing. I mean, I would say when you hear this, you think the Bloody Mary is surrounded by urine, and this is the founding fathers with in a manger scene where the Bill of Rights is sitting in like a small baby basket. I mean, if this was done by the religious, I can see how they would say awesome. It's simply, I've got to believe, because it's from FFRF, this did not perk anything that I felt you could reasonably be offended by.
Yeah, well, in fact, in our lawsuit, we point out there is a history of animus between Greg Abbott and the Freedom from Religion Foundation on past issues that he's complained about. When he was Attorney General under Governor Perry, they even had a press conference to go after us outsiders interfering with Texan, right? And some of the statements he made back then on different issues, the cross on the police cars and the Kuntz cheerleaders, that whole thing. So he hates us, and he's on record as hating us. And so when he saw our sign, he didn't like it. And what we were celebrating was December 15th. December 15th is the day that the Bill of Rights was adopted. So in fact, the sign that we had up explained that. There was a historical reason. It's educational. And Christians don't own the whole month of December. If anything, they have December 25th. Mm-hmm. But for December the 15th, we had our display up celebrating the birth of the Bill of Rights. And in fact, one of the newspapers in Austin editorialized saying our display was really kind of charming. It was like an homage to the season. You're talking about the birth of something important. Yes. Well, there you go. So anyway, Governor Abbott hates our group, and he's on record hating our group, and all that's part of the record.
Well said. I totally agree.
We want to remind everyone to go to iTunes and find us and rate us. Give us a 5-star rating, and find us easy on iTunes or YouTube, where the Mythicist Milwaukee podcast is gaining ground every day. We are producing a debate series, and the first one is coming up on March 19th. It's Richard Carrier and Justin Bass, an evangelist. Are you familiar with Justin Bass?
Yeah, he debated him. I watched that on YouTube.
Did you?
Yes.
Yeah, I debated him. I think he's from Dallas, right? I debated him. Yeah, and he's got this, there's this kind of a new apologetics tactic, which isn't new, but they're calling it the minimal facts argument. Here are the minimal facts that all scholars, even the skeptics, agree with, and what kind of a case can we build for the resurrection of Jesus based on just these minimal facts? And so he brought that up during my debate. I think it was last year or the year before. And Richard will be ready. Richard is really, really sharp. He'll be ready for this guy.
He's something, isn't he? And, of course, in October, the follow-up to that is the big one, Robert Price and Bart Ehrman. Who do you like in that debate?
Yeah, you could prognosticate here, I think, legally.
You're going to be there. You're going to be there for that one. So who do you
I'll be there. That's right. But I have immense respect for both of them. And on the question of mythicism and historicity, both of them will tell you. And, Richard Carrier is on Robert Price's side. Both of them will tell you that historical questions are a matter of probabilities. And so Bart Ehrman might put the probability of the actual historical Jesus at, I don't know where he would put it, let's say 60%, which means you would round it off to yes, he existed. And Richard Carrier has put it around 20, I think, or 22%. And I might put it around 30 or 40. I don't know. I mean, how do you come up with those numbers? But in any event, your positions might not be that far apart, although if you're lower than 0.5, you would have to say no. And if you're higher than 0.5, the probability, you would have to say yes. So it's a good debate of how far away are we from 0.5 as far as the likelihood that there actually was a historical Jesus. And Bart Ehrman, of course, is just brilliant. And I'm reading his newest book now, Jesus Before the Gospels, and we're going to have him on our show next week. Although I have to say I tend to lean towards the mythicist side. I tend to lean toward Richard Carrier on this particular question.
But it sounds like always keeping an open mind.
Oh, I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
But it sounds like you're always keeping an open mind, always willing to consider and listen to more evidence.
Yeah, and the thing about probabilities is that you're free to adjust it. As new information comes in, you plug it in, and, Richard is big on the Bayes theorem thing, which is kind of cool, and that's why he came out with his number of 21%. But Bayes' theorem says, hey, when you get more information, you should be able to adjust your likelihood up or down. So suppose you are close to 0.5 and you're not really sure. Some information would come in that would cause you to lower it or to raise it. So That's flexibility. No historian is going to tell you that they have 0% or 100% certainty on any question of history.
Well, we're going to find out in October, and Dan Barker's going to be there when he speaks ahead of the big debate between Robert Price and Bart Ehrman, when the decision will be made. After that debate, there will be no more question. We will have decided whether Jesus existed or not, and we won't have to talk about it
And
anymore.
you'll want to be there, too.
You will.
Because it's not going to be available to the public right away. You can also, if you're listening from California or Australia or somewhere that is inaccessible, you can get that online. There for a small fee, and watch that either live or the day after
the fact, right, as a pay-per-view kind of YouTube thing.
That way you can be current and up on things.
Nice. We are out of time. It's been Dan Barker. Dan, pleasure having you, and everybody run out and buy God, the most unpleasant character in fiction, in all fiction, on Sterling Press. Available at all the usual outlets, right? Amazon, I'm sure, wherever else.
Yep. Or from FFRF. You can buy it from FFRF for $20. It's cheaper.
Oh, there you go.
And it'll be a signed copy. If you go to our webpage, you can get it there.
There you go. Go right to the webpage. You heard it here. And again, thanks for joining us. Next week, it's Bernie Deller, author and atheist, on the Mythicist Milwaukee show. Dan, we will see you in Washington, if not before, and again in October. Thanks for joining us, bud.
All right. It was really fun, Rob and Brian.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Take it easy, everybody.